Hey everyone, welcome back to my live writing test series where I write a brand new essay in response to this week's newest IELTS Task 2 question. Alright, let's go and see what we have for today. Nowadays, most scientific research is funded and conducted by private companies rather than the government. Do the advantages of this situation outweigh its disadvantages? So, let's see. I don't think we've had a science-based topic yet, so that should be interesting. Of course, you might feel like this is something that you may have to think about quite a lot because, again, we don't necessarily think about scientific research in our day-to-day lives. So I understand that can be a bit confusing, a bit weird, but it's a fairly, again, these kinds of topics, they do expect you to have some awareness of those. So it's not that you necessarily have to learn about these things, but definitely read up about stuff like that. Okay, so let's see. The first thing I'll probably want to do, as usual, it's a good idea to have your main idea sentences down, so you can it's easier. That's what I personally find. But of course, some people like to write their introductions, so whatever goes. It's personal. This depends entirely on you and what you find comfortable. So again, whether you really think it's largely positive or whether you think it's largely negative, that doesn't really matter. You can choose whichever, not like choose rather, but like I've said before, you need a weak opinion and a strong opinion, right? So the side that you do really favor and the side that you don't really favor. But the order doesn't really matter, right? Just like with any other essay, really, choose whatever you feel you can. If it was an opinion essay, then of course you would really be able to make a choice and just write about what you want. Here, of course, you have to talk about both sides, the positives and the negatives. I think it's maybe, I don't know, let's see, I think it's maybe largely disadvantages. So my first main idea, I think that's just going to be about the advantages. The first opinion that you express should be a weak opinion. You want to do it this way because you're letting the other side have their say, and then you present your point of view. So in that way, it's kind of easier for your reader as well. Let's see. So my first sentence has to be with advantages, right? Most scientific research is funded and conducted by private companies. So is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Okay, let's see. My sentence has to be about the benefits of this. But of course, when you write a main idea sentence, please don't write explanations of things. I see a lot of the time, people tend to do that. Like they explain every single thing they need to do right in the main idea sentence, and then whatever they write in the rest of the paragraph, it just feels like they're repeating things, right? So don't stuff your main idea sentence full of things. Keep it light and keep it simple. I don't know if there's some background noise or something of people yelling. Just ignore that. Okay. Right, let's see. Okay, privately funded. Privately funded research. Let's see. Now there's actually two ways you can write about this. You could say that privately funded research is beneficial, and you could also say that privately funded research has a whole bunch of issues. Or you could do the comparison sort of thing, right? You could say, for example, that when companies fund their own scientific research instead of relying on the government, it's good. Or you could say when the government does not invest in funding science, that leads to catastrophic issues or something like that. So you don't really have to worry too much about how exactly do I need to present myself. Unless you were aiming for like an 8.59 or something. Anywhere from an 8 to 9. I find that deserves a different kind of approach. Yeah, I mean, of course, what I'm writing here is an ideal response, and like I always say, don't be afraid if you feel like you cannot write like I do, because this is the result of years and years of training, right? I mean, if you learn a new language, for example, as I am, and you read other people writing stuff and you feel like, wow, how do they do it? That's okay, that's normal. You don't have to compare yourself to that. You just need to present something that's easy to read. That's the most important thing. Too often people overcomplicate everything, and your reader really cannot understand you, right? That's how you judge any kind of writing, right? If it's good, it's easy to read. If it's not easy to read, if it's confusing, then it's not good. Of course, that excludes things like research papers and stuff. That's a whole different thing entirely. Anyway, so privately funded research is responsible for many of mankind's. Why is everything bold? Let me just change that. Okay. Why is it? Okay, good. Okay, this really shouldn't be the font. Let me change that. There we go. Many of mankind's innovations. Okay, there we go. What's happening here? Why is it bold? Okay, there we go. And that's body paragraph 2. In scientific science and development. Okay, now I know some of the language is kind of technical and weird, like public interests. You don't necessarily have to use the same word. You can simply say the people's interest. It's the same thing. Just saying, for example, public interest is a bit more, academic in style. There really is no limit to how academically you can write, of course, but you don't necessarily have to, use exactly the same kinds of words. It's just an idea for you. Maybe today you see this kind of thing, and 10 days down the line you write an essay or whatever. Maybe you're taking the exam and you think, I once read this little phrase, public interest. I think I'll use that, right? That's how we learn things. So this is kind of the point of these writing test series, because it's not like I'm teaching you from A to Z. Of course, 45-minute YouTube video, that's kind of difficult, but the more you consume content, especially when it comes to language learning, the better your production will be. And this is, I'm not just saying it, I've actually done that for myself. That's how I know it works, right? Any kind of advice I give someone, I usually test it first. And of course, it's not just me saying that. There's tons and tons of people who've done the same thing. Okay, so now I'm going to write down my points. You just need 3 points. That's it. Definitely don't write like 2 points. A lot of people just barely write anything. Just yesterday I checked an essay and there were just 2 supporting ideas. That's too less. You have to ensure that you have at least 3 supporting ideas, because remember, an essay, what you're writing, it's 250 words minimum, right? And on average, most people will write about 280, maybe 300, but not more than that, right? So, obviously, to write that much, you need content. And if you don't have content, if you're just, you've got like 1 or 2 supporting ideas, that's going to be difficult. Okay, so let's see. For example, there's this what's it called? Aspirin, right? So, yeah, I know that's just an example, though. Maybe I shouldn't have that be my supporting idea, but that can in fact be a tiny example. Yeah, many medications developed through large companies. I believe it was Bayer. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. What if I am wrong? In that case, if I'm not really sure if it was Bayer, just don't write that. Yeah, some large pharmaceutical conglomerate came up with aspirin. Yeah. Okay. And obviously, if I'm a company, my goal is to have, as much profit as I possibly can earn. So, and let's say if I'm trying to cure an illness that a lot of people have, right? It makes sense for me to develop a drug because I know lots of people are going to buy it, and that helps to solve their problems, of course. So it's like, killing two birds with one stone. Like, I get the money and you get your illness, have your illness fixed. Yeah, so, right. They would naturally work on issues that concern a large number of people. It doesn't make sense, for example, I'm not sure if you heard, there is this illness, it's apparently, I don't know, super rare or whatever, but the drug that you need to cure that illness is like, I don't know, $500,000 or something, and that's just one dose, yeah? Now, obviously, it's a very rare disease, so there's no pharmaceutical interest, right? Because, investing, it takes a lot of money, into any kind of research, but especially research into drugs, right? And if I invest that much money, and there's just like maybe 2 people in the entire world every year who need that drug, it doesn't make financial sense, for a company to do that, right? They would only work on issues that, okay, let's say, for example, okay, let's take malaria, anti-malarial drugs. Now, investing money into that makes sense because pretty much all over the world, people who do live in the tropics do have, issues with that. So it makes sense, and of course, that helps to alleviate the problems of a lot of people. And that's a very good point. In fact, takes a lot of money to, yeah. So see, when you think about it, you don't necessarily have to talk to yourself like I do, of course, but you can, do it mentally, right? Think about the process. Try and, go from step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? Think about all of these things are related to the real world. Right, so yeah, the kind of yeah, of course, the government has a lot of money as well, but the government has a lot of things to take care of, right? Too many responsibilities on its plate. So the kind of money you need, the kind of, because research is long term. Today I try and find out about whatever drug. I'm not going to have my results tomorrow, next week, next month. No, it takes years, possibly even decades, right? It's a long process, and that doesn't really have a lot of return on investment until you make the drug and it passes whatever the Food and Drug Administration tests and stuff like that. Yeah, so the kind of money needed is with pharma companies. You can use short forms here, that's fine. This is just note making anyway. Insulin in some countries is, that kind, I don't know if this is a good argument. This is again more of a law kind of thing, because if they wanted to make insulin cheaper, they probably could, but yeah, like in my country it's super cheap, so maybe I'll delete that. Yeah, don't be afraid to change your ideas. Yeah. Okay, so my point is public interests suffer, so less government investment. You have to ultimately rely on what pharma companies want to work on, and they will not, Cheap drugs, for example, painkillers. How much does a painkiller cost? Barely anything, right? But that's, of course, there's a lot of factors. You can say the same thing for anything. So don't worry that, oh, but, drugs here are cheap because the government wants them to be cheap, right? Or because the government gives them a subsidy or whatever. They don't expect you to go, super in depth. Okay, looks good. I think I should probably, okay. I think that's fine. Public. This is kind of the same thing, I feel, but I think I'll just leave it alone for now. Yeah, that's good enough. I think I'll just go with that. Okay. So now I need to write my introduction, and let's see. Okay, so what can I say here? All right, so okay. Although a government's role is to serve its public, I'm kind of just seeing where things go, so I might change this sentence. And it's okay, you should have the confidence to be flexible. And it's not always possible to completely form a sentence in your mind and then handwrite it or then type it, yeah? Sometimes you just really, I mean, I understand, of course, that this is easier, when you're doing it on the computer compared to on a piece of paper. For that reason, you may want to take the computer-based test. But again, some people really like writing by hand. Me personally, I haven't written stuff in years, so that's not a good idea for me. Anyway, although governments, rural services, world have many responsibilities, some of which are more pressing than others. And this gap is usually filled in by private players. I feel like it's too large. I don't know. When it comes to pharmaceutical, oh gosh, this is scientific research. I'm talking about drugs entirely. This is. Do you see how you have to be so careful at all times? You have to be hyper alert because you see, I was just thinking of drugs, but there's so much else, like research for example, nuclear energy, right? So I think I'm just going to yeah. Yeah, that's better, right? For example, there's this, you can create homes out of recycled plastic. And of course, the government hasn't invested in that. It's usually some, private company. So that's good. Yeah, I think this is fine. Yeah, this is good. Now, all I had to do is change pharma companies to private companies. And here as well, do you see that? Yeah. So, that's really important. Pharma again. Government will look after public interests. Okay. This is not really relevant, so I'm gonna change that. Oh yes, of course, because they have, the copyright, trademark, intellectual property laws and stuff like that. Even if it's a good solution, it may be very expensive to implement. So, yeah, I think I don't need to change the whole thing. Many solutions tend to be expensive or unaffordable. I think, I'm not sure, of course. Yeah, exactly, Sikander. Yeah, and this is the thing because I started with that one idea and I'm like, oh yes, let's think of drugs. And it kind of just, went into a whole tangent. And so that's why you have to look at your question, right? Because, I mean, it's entirely possible that you think of your main ideas and you go into this whole kind of rabbit hole, and you may get sidetracked, right? This is why at every step, not just when I'm writing a main idea, supporting idea, an introduction, whatever, again, always, I mean, during these 40 minutes that you have for your essay, of course it's important to do well in your letter also, but that's usually less important because you don't necessarily need a 7 for your letter to have a 7 overall. Even if you have a 6.5 there, it's fine as long as your essay is a 7, right? That's super important. Right, so I think that's good enough for. If I'm talking about innovation, I think I should probably change that as well because for solving many of mankind's problems, I mean, things like, I mean, yeah, well, the internet was actually I think it was called DARPANET in the 80s or something. It was a military project. That's a different thing. That's a great example of why the government, government investment is so important. Would a private company have done that sort of thing? Maybe not. But then again, you have private companies like Tesla, for example, very popular example. They've got electric cars, and now like electric, motorbikes and cars are like the rage, right? But would the government invest in this sort of thing? Not really, because obviously they're still very expensive. It's not exactly something everyone can, use or afford to buy. I think that's a great example, in fact. And of course, this is why it's so important to consume media, to consume knowledge in any form, because all of these tiny things that you know about your world will come in handy. Maybe I'll put that in as an example somewhere, but let's see. Oh well, again, okay, many medications. That's one possibility. That is a problem too. So that's fine. This is fine. This is okay to keep over here. Public interest solutions tend to be expensive. They're useful but expensive. Solar cars are, sorry, they're not solar, they're electric. So they're good, but they're of course not affordable. And why would the government, invest in research for that sort of thing? They're more likely to tie up with private partners, right? Because again, they have a lot of responsibilities on their plate. Okay, yeah, I should change this. Pharma companies, again, that's why is it pharma? Okay, so I just had to change that. Public interest. How do public interests suffer? I should change this. Private will look after profitable. Right. Many solutions tend to be expensive, and not everyone can benefit from them. And let's see, how does, oh yeah, for example, fiber internet, stuff like that, right? Starlink and all of that stuff as well. If you don't have private players, if you don't have any kind of government controlled entity in any field, yeah, the customer tends to have less choice, because large companies even band together and they form monopolies, oligopolies, and things like that. So yeah, but maybe that's a bit too much for this. Okay, let's see. Government does not invest in. When it comes to While I'll just finish my introduction first anyway. Something's progress in science is not left entirely in the private sector's hands. Active government intervention. Now this reads a lot like something you'd read in a thesis or something. It's kind of technical, I feel, but it's very accurate, so that's fine. Again, you don't necessarily have to use the same words, but some ideas you can definitely keep them in mind. Active government intervention involvement is essential for public welfare. Now that is a very usually what I would teach someone to do is write a more simple sentence. But again, remember, that's for people who want like a 7.5 kind of thing. Now if I was aiming for, again, that's the whole point of this series, I'm not trying to write a band 7 essay. What I am trying to do is write an ideal essay, an ideal response. So some things may be different. If you're a student and you're watching, of course you know that you are taught something entirely, not entirely, but in some ways quite different. I wouldn't tell someone to write something like this, but I know I can express myself with precision that's why it's okay for me to write something like this. And you see how I'm not using the words benefit, advantage, good, bad, right? You can, there's nothing wrong with it, but if you want to express yourself in a more precise way without necessarily being very direct, then you would do something like that. You can also add an ethical point. Yes, I'm not entirely sure because even government funded research, for example, when you research drugs, let's take that. Lots of drugs used to be tested on animals. It wouldn't matter if it was a private company or a government owned corporation, they would still, because that's standard practice. Not sure about ethics. I mean, yes, it is likely maybe, but then again, governments do tend to, have issues in terms of corruption. So again, neither side is perfect. But yeah, you have a good point there. It would just need to kind of be fine-tuned and developed. Yeah, I think my introduction is pretty much done. I don't really think I want to add anything to that. So yeah, you don't, like I said, you don't really want to write a huge introduction. It really doesn't serve any purpose. Okay, there we go. So that's that. You should always look at your ideas and see if you want to rearrange them, yeah, for coherence's sake. Sometimes ideas flow better when you put them in a certain order, yeah. It doesn't always have to be done, but you should always just check just in case. I think this one can be last. That's better. Yeah. Largely due to the fact that a private company, a business, let's just put it that way, would want to secure the most profits. This whole thing, in fact, I'm going to put in a comma here, is actually a transition. Unethical synthetic wombs. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the government would ever invest in synthetic wombs. That's a really good point. Ethics can actually be kind of a gray area, right? It's not entirely, for example, I mean, until I think 70, 80 years ago, people would consume cocaine and heroin and it was, normal, So, yeah, would the government have invested in something like that? Maybe not, because, again, people would consume these drugs to be more productive, to deal with tiredness, stuff like that. Now we know, okay, it's very damaging, but, we didn't have that much research back then. That's a very good point. In fact, I'm thinking of how to incorporate it because, again, somebody might say, again, that, it's, a synthetic womb. Well, somebody might say, you could argue that, it's useful for people who, women who cannot get pregnant otherwise, right? But then you could also say that, well, it's like playing God. But then you could also say the same thing for so many treatments that we have nowadays, like IVF and other stuff like that, right? So surrogacy, for example. So I mean, yeah, it is definitely, all these topics are in fact very hotly debated, and this kind of depends on you, right? What do you think? Like, it ultimately depends on you as the author, because it's your essay, it's your point of view. You can definitely include something like that, because yeah, it's true that the government would probably not invest in something like that, because again, they don't want to be seen as except in rare cases, of course, but they don't necessarily want to be seen as doing something that would really divide a country, divide their citizens. But you have a very good point, Sikandar. That's a good idea. Okay, so what was I? Oh, gosh, why am I writing over here? Okay, I should be writing here. Okay, there we go. Okay, largely due to the fact that a business would want to secure. Okay, so this whole thing here, from largely to profits, this is actually a transition. I'm transitioning from my main idea to my other point, and this is kind of what a transition does, is it smoothens the path from that main idea to the supporting idea, and from a supporting idea to another supporting idea. Now, most people will just use things like consequently, in addition, as a result, stuff like that, depending, of course, on the relationship between your ideas. But if you're looking for a really high score, 8.59 something, your transitions would have to be almost invisible. Invisible as in, if I were to look, at a full essay, just look at a full essay, I shouldn't be easily able to, look at words like in addition, etc., right? But that's not something you have to worry about. If you're looking for a 6.5, 7, 7.5, even 8 to an extent, in fact, we have had a couple students who actually received 8s in writing, and again, they didn't exactly use transitions like these. Despite not using that, they still got really, really high scores. So yeah, you don't really have to bother yourself with this kind of thing, but it's just to show you there's ranges of academic writing. Yeah, so largely due to the fact that the most profits, they would focus on solving issues that affect a large percentage. Yeah, I'll change. I know when you're typing. Of the population. As that gives them. This is gonna be like another 400-word essay. That's a really bad habit. I should reel that in. Okay, they would focus on solving issues that affect a large percentage of gives them the opportunity, as that presents the opportunity to earn the most profits, earn the most amount of revenue. Okay, and then another equally important factor to consider. The kind of financial resources required, and you can see that once you have your ideas listed out, it doesn't take much time to put them into sentences. Yeah, I usually find that it takes a little bit more time for me to fine-tune my ideas, and the actual typing stuff and the sentence formation barely takes any time. But it can be different for everyone, of course. You have to find your own mix. Required for such research, the kind of financial resources are usually with such private companies, as there is often a long period of time. It's also an appetite for risk, yeah, because you don't know. I'm investing money into this. I don't know if it's going to be successful. It's a huge risk, and governments are less likely to take risks. So I think I should add that here. Kind of financial resources and risk appetites between research and approval of and the final product. Usually I don't want to say spendthrift, I would say risk averse. I have many avenues that require okay, and finally, let's see. Okay, I don't want to write finally. I think This is kind of an example. I really don't want to include it. Now I think it's kind of irrelevant. So what I'll do, maybe I'll think of something else. I have said that the large percentage, then there's the question of money, and let's see. I think they tend to be more efficient as well. Um, with the government, I mean, you're gonna pay the scientist even if that person is working for like 5 years and not coming up with something. But when a company sees that, hey, this thing really isn't working out, they're more likely to stop that project, right? So their work is more efficient. I mean, that's always the case. Go to a public sector bank, go to a private sector one. You'll know what I'm talking about. Their work is more efficient, and not just efficient, but also likely to be. Let's take, for example, the COVID vaccines. All the vaccines that came out, of course they had government support, of course they did, there's no discounting that, but the ones that came out, they're all private companies, right? Big pharma companies. So again, they have the resources, they're ready to invest. Again, when an opportunity presents itself, they're likely to capitalize on that, and they're more efficient. Simply, that's the nature of the private enterprise. There's no job security or whatever. Let me see. Another equally important factor, largely due to the fact when considering the effectiveness of their work, privately held are more likely to be to work in a more, let's say, they get results quicker, I think. Yeah, the government enterprises are, exactly, decision making is also quicker. You don't have like 100 people to deal with and 100 signatures on 100 documents. Effectiveness of their work, privately held companies are more likely to work in, why am I using more so many times, right? Okay, they're more likely to work in a quick and in a quick fashion, whereas public organizations if you do want to ignore that, because you can use a Z if you would like, but that's American English. If you use an S, that's British English. Doesn't really matter, both types are fine. Depending on your word processor, you might see that red line, and that's okay. That's nothing wrong with that. Usually take your receive and receive approvals, let alone start work. Such delays cause all of mankind, all of humanity, to be held back collectively, right? And then finally, private players, privately funded companies, businesses. They usually do so I think no. Results in most people. That's fine. And then you have the next one. There we go. Okay. Private companies look at profitable ideas, and this is an irrefutable point. Private companies would not exist if they did not make profits, but a government held entity, they can continue to make loss after loss after loss, and they can still exist because it's the taxpayer that pays for all of that. So yeah. Well, a public entity can sustain if a project is beneficial. Yeah. Okay, well, this is like you see how it doesn't have, it looks very different to my supporting idea here. Private companies look at profitable ideas. I kind of have a similar point in the previous one as well, right? They want to secure the most profits, but again, it's just the word profits. Again, it is similar, but of course not the same. I'm saying that if a project is helpful but it's loss making, no private company is going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? For suffering, private company exists, or rather private companies plural. Then I have to change this. Yeah. Sustainable strong for project benefit citizens. And I think that can actually be my first idea. Or maybe I can then say, yeah, as a result of this, yeah, so that's my second idea. You can, of course. I really have a bad throat, I don't know why. Okay, so you can, of course, have ideas that are cause and effect types of things, yeah? It depends on what kind of content you have. So what's the next? Oh yeah, this is deleted. Okay, so to look at profitable ideas. As a result, businesses, companies will only work on areas of research that are most likely to yield profits, and they would not waste their effort, their time and money on ideas that are inexpensive, unlike the government. Which is more likely look for avenues of research in which the solution is affordable for most of its citizenry. There we go. And the last one. Last one's about many solutions. I think, yeah, in a similar vein, many products of privately conducted research tend to be rather expensive, to which they are out of reach for the masses, despite the importance of such products. If the government were to step into such a role, they would not prioritize. I think this is like maybe unrelated. Let's see, now this paragraph is huge in comparison to this one, so this is kind of underdeveloped, at least by my standards. I think I need to explain this clearly. Many products of privately conducted research tend to be rather expensive. Many products of privately conducted research, such as electric cars, tend to be rather expensive to the masses, despite the importance and usefulness. it is were to decrease investment in the sciences, it would I've already used that would result in kind of thing, so I don't want to repeat that. If the government were to divest, you can even say that, it would cause unfathomable for the public, for the people. It's kind of lopsided. I don't like that, so maybe I'll change this, because I don't want it to be like this. Let me see. This looks like it's 120 or something. Maybe that should be good. Okay, that's 160. Okay, that's huge. Why is it? Okay, then this is like 200. That's way too big. I have to cut it short. When considering their effectiveness, yeah. Privately held companies mostly working quickly, whereas, okay, that's good. Is the kind of financial resources and risk appetites that usually only available with as there is of a long period of time between commencement of research, between the market, have other avenues that require investment, considering effectiveness. Okay, I think that's kind of okay, because I will of course have. Okay, that's the end. Okay, then I still should. This is fine. I mean, it's not a huge difference between these two paragraphs, but it still kind of just, grinds my gears. I think it's just like one line short. That's okay. That's fine. You shouldn't worry about that anyway. Okay, looks good. I think I'll just keep it like that. There we go. So then all I have to do is write my conclusion, and so in conclusion it is yeah, this you don't really need to change anything there. It's fine. Although private interests in science have yielded, I know it's wrong. Okay, have yielded much progress. It does not entirely replace the importance of government investment, right? It cannot. Importance and necessity. Okay, although private interests, I think I'll just use may here, yeah, because again that's a weak modal verb. I don't know why I can feel like there's some kind of delay between me clicking something and maybe this is okay. May yield much progress and benefit for humankind. Maybe instead of much I'll write some. Again, this is entirely your perspective. Remember, it's your essay, right? So you decide how you want to write things, as long as it's meaningful, makes sense. Yeah. Okay, let me see. And yeah, so I've got to finish that. May yield much progress and benefit for humankind cannot replace the importance of government investment. If public companies were to entirely divest, organizations rather, catastrophic. Yield catastrophic results. I've already kind of said that, so I don't wanna repeat that. I think this is good enough. My point is made. I don't necessarily have to, go on and on about something. Okay, so there's the whole thing. Let's see how big this is. Okay, that's 445. It's okay. Well, that's usually how much I tend to write. But again, this is just a bunch of ideas for you to refer to. Yeah, and you can pause the screen. I'll just scroll down a bit. You can pause if you want to read it. There's the introduction, body paragraph 1. Then we have the next body paragraph, and finally the conclusion. Okay, that was fun, and I think that's enough for today. What we'll do on Saturday is I'm going to do a speaking test. I haven't done those in a fairly long time, so I'll do that. And then, of course, again, if you're looking for another essay, you'll find one next Wednesday. Again, roughly the same time, so make sure to you'll get notifications. I think you'll have to click on notify me or something. I guess there's a bell icon or something. So make sure you click on that, yeah? And I'll see you next time. If you're interested in a speaking test, come back on Saturday. But if you want to just see an essay, you can come back on Wednesday.